Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeb Bush, and I have the honor of having a conversation with my friend Hadi Partovi, who is the head of the incredible organization that's helping so many teachers and students around the United States and increasingly around the world to learn how to code. Code.org is an explosive not-for-profit that is really making a difference in the lives of a lot of students. Hadi, welcome to our show. This will go out to all sorts of schools all across the country. We've gotten some questions from students as well, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Governor Bush. Thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be speaking with you today.
What's up? What have you been up to in the pandemic? Anything interesting that you can share, that some best practices maybe for the rest of us that are quarantined?
Well, like everybody else, I've been at home. My kids are also at home, so we're struggling with figuring out who's got which devices to learn on and how to get the children not on screen time too much. And life for for everybody else, our lives have changed. For me personally, the work at code.org is very different because our work is usually in schools and helping schools teach computer science. And right now, what we're doing instead is trying to, with school closed, we're directly offering live interactive classrooms for students to tune into. So I've started a live interactive classroom where I'm directly teaching the students.
Is there a way for is there a link or something we can go to? So, because we're not talking just about young people. There's some old people that could probably use this skill right now too, like me.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, so the classroom we're hosting is every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on the West Coast, 1 o'clock on the East Coast. It's called Code Break. If you Google Code Break, you'll find it. Our messaging is, are you home alone, with, tired, bored, distracted, want something new? Take a code break. And we've had, at this point, yesterday we had 20,000 students simultaneously join us to learn. And it's not just a video stream, it's an interactive classroom. So there's questions that the students get to answer, and and a back and forth. There's dozens of students on camera and then thousands of students learning in the background. And the coolest part is we have special guests on the show. So yesterday was our biggest day because we had Bill Gates actually join us in teaching computer science. It was a pretty unique treat.
That's amazing.
Next week we have the inventor of the internet is going to be joining us to explain how the internet works. So
you set a pretty high bar there, my friend. Bill Gates, the inventor of the internet. Who's after that? Pope Francis?
We haven't announced the next guest beyond that. But a few weeks before, we had Mark Cuban join, and this was fun because we ran sort of a live Shark Tank with students, where students pitched app ideas to Mark, and then instead of Mark deciding which one was the winner, the entire audience chose which app they liked the most, and then we taught how to build that app live during the class, and then shared it out to the audience so that they have the app on their phones by the end of the hour. So it was fun to show how you can go from an idea, choose the idea on the fly, build it, and then have it all in 1 hour.
So this kind of brings up an interesting subject. People, when confronted with challenges, sometimes kind of get in the fetal position and don't get out of it until the crisis somehow is resolved. Others see a challenge like this of being quarantined on a global basis. I mean, this is unprecedented, as an opportunity to think differently, to try different things. Great entrepreneurs typically find their business mojo during downturns. Certainly, the idea that you just described is one that you might not have thought about had it not been the fact that you were quarantined with your family. So tell me about what you think could come out of all of this, where people are suffering for sure, and there's a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, in general, my own life experiences from the past help me reflect on this. I grew up in Tehran, Iran during the Islamic Revolution and the war with Iraq. So I spent many years of my childhood with quite a bit of adversity. And at the time I thought, oh, this is terrible. And it was pretty terrible. But it built up in me a lot of resilience. And what it taught me also is that children especially are very resilient. And the concept, the image you said of the fetal position, I know many people who are basically kind of freaking out and not knowing what to do. And I don't suggest that the struggles people face aren't real. People are out of work. People are worried about whether they'll have even food or be able to pay rent, let alone schools being closed. But at the same time, that's no excuse to basically stop. We as a human race, we have to come together to beat this thing. And that partly involves figuring out how we unite together to beat the virus, but it also means how we figure out individually how to get creative. What can you make the best out of this time? If you were told at any other time of your life that you'll have months on end to stay at home to do something new, to get creative or come up with something, you'd almost wish that you could have that. You're like, oh, I can't because I have this and that to do. So now that we have this opportunity, it wasn't of our own choice, but what can we make of it? One of the things I'm sure you've seen is Sir Isaac Newton invented most of the math that we all study during the quarantine from the Black Plague. And he was in college, but basically his university closed, and he then had to spend 2 years on a farm and inventing all the math equations for things like gravity. Calculus was invented in a quarantine. So
Yeah.
Great things are going to come out of this period. I can't wait to see what they are.
Tell me about your first years in America after coming from Iran. The cultural differences. I don't know if you if you were fluent in English when you came or not, but tell me about that experience.
Sure. I'm very proud to be an immigrant, and my family was very proud of immigrating legally. We went through years of effort to do all the paperwork, both to get the permission to leave Iran and the permission to enter this country. And I have to say, it wasn't easy. Immigration into the United States has never been easy. It felt that there was a lot of hoops to jump over. And then when I came here, I spoke English, but I had learned English from books. So I didn't know the pronunciation. I didn't know any slang words. So I knew a lot of big words. I had read Shakespeare, but I hadn't seen a single television show. So jokes would go over my head. I didn't know how to curse. And I was in 7th grade when kids are really exploring a lot of topics that I just didn't even know the vocabulary for. So it was rough. I got teased a lot. I remember in the early weeks, people chanting "Bomb Iran," and my nicknames growing up were, my most common nickname was Jihad, which is not a great nickname to have. And for me, I was like fleeing away from that country, but still getting associated with it was rough. At the same time, coming to America is the best thing that's ever happened in my life. Having left basically a war-torn country in a religious totalitarian government and entering a land where you have freedoms that we take for granted, the ability to vote, the ability to speak up, the ability to complain about anything you want and not fear for your life, not worrying that your stuff is going to get taken away by the government or some weird law gets changed and your whole life is turned upside down. Those are things we take for granted in this country that many people don't have. And even as a 12-year-old entering into this, it was such a life-changing difference to have that.
What got you into computer science?
So I first started computer programming living in Iran. My father brought home a Commodore 64 one day that he had gotten from Italy. They didn't have stores in Iran selling these devices. And at a time when, this is a time when every single night we'd spend in the basement because the power was out and we were literally getting bombed. It was a tough time to live in, but during the days, my escape from that harsh reality was learning to code on the computer. And it didn't have any games. And so my dad said, write your own games and basically use your imagination. And when you have nothing better to do, it's a great motivator to do that. By the time I came to the United States, even as early as when I was age 14 is when I started my first internship. And I started working as a summer intern at tech companies throughout high school and then throughout college as well to pay for my education. And I realized from that how much demand there is for these skills, how nobody's learning them, and also just what great career opportunities there are. That the ability to be creative and to impact the world is so much greater if you know how to harness technology and then spread your ideas through that.
So computer science has always been a high value skill to be able to pursue a career and all sorts of things. But compared to where we were 10 years ago, where we are today, describe where you think we'll be in terms of computer science and its applicability over the next decade or two?
So there's both the applicability in the world, and then there's the education view of it. I'll talk about the world, and then we can talk about education. I think, 20 years ago was at the point where the internet was a relatively new thing. It was five years or 6 years since the World Wide Web had been invented. 20 years ago, most of us didn't have Wi-Fi. Most of us didn't have digital cameras. Smartphones didn't exist. So computers were this thing that you use on your desktop for office work. We're now at the point where it's everywhere you look, everything you do, it's in your pocket, in your car. All of entertainment, communications, commerce are running on computer systems. So we're already at the point of kind of saturation of our lives and society. But the capabilities that are still possible are beyond most people's imaginations. Right now we're getting used to every year seeing something you're like, you can't believe that somebody invented that or made that. The way that healthcare is going to change, for example, diseases will be diagnosed by computers and they're going to be cured by personalized medicine. As just one example, is going to make all of us live healthier and longer, more fulfilling lives. And that's just the start of it, but it's going to be one of the most impactful things. Personalized education is going to be more possible. Personalized entertainment. There's so many things that at best you can imagine, but the next 20 years are going to have greater change than the last 40 years. And that's just hard to envision, but it will be.
So tell me how that applies to education as well, and as it relates to computer science. I know a lot of students are turned on by it and aren't intimidated by it, and they embrace it with a lot of passion. Then there are others that say, "Oh, I'm not really good at math. I'm not sure I can do this," and never really embrace the possibility even of learning computer science. That's a myth, isn't it? And your organization seems to be shattering that myth at a record pace.
Yep. So first of all, thank you for that question. It's a wonderful question. And we've been working hard to get schools to teach computer science and to recognize it not only as a career and technical education field, but as a foundational field. I ask people, why do we teach math? We don't teach math because there's so many jobs for mathematicians. We teach it because it helps you learn how to think, and it helps you develop critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, and it's foundational for all sorts of other fields. The same is true of computer science. And I believe over the next 10 years, people are going to learn that computer science isn't just something we could teach for people who want to go into tech, but rather to broaden their ability to actually think logically. We've now reached the point where there's 6 different studies that show students who are learning computer science in school outperform at math, at reading, at writing, at science, at problem solving. They're 17% more likely to go to college than students who don't study computer science. So this has nothing to do with whether they get jobs in technology or not. And some of these are even randomized control trials where they take a group of students, split them into 2 randomly. One group is taught computer science, one group is taught traditional math and science, and then the group that had computer science outperforms the original group, or the control group. So computer science is just helpful for your career regardless of where you want to get into. But this is the best part. New research that just came out a month and a half ago shows that your language skills are 8 times more relevant to learning computer science than math skills. So if you have a student who's really good at language and not good at math, they're going to outperform at learning computer programming the students who's really good at math and not good at language skills. That completely shatters every stereotype that people have about basically who's going to be good at computer programming.
So we have some questions from students across the country, and the first one is actually a girl named Ali. She's a first grader, and she'd like to learn to code. And so, can you start in first grade?
You can absolutely start in first grade. In fact, my son is in kindergarten right now, and he's starting as well. Code.org has classes that start for students who don't even know how to read. They read the instructions out loud, and you get basically drag and drop arrows on the screen to control what you want to have happen. And you can learn how to put together an algorithm and how to get a program to basically solve a maze or things like that without even learning how to read or write. So you can start quite young.
And how many, give us a little bit of an overview of how the growth of code.org, the number of teachers, maybe you could answer that question as well in the sense of you teach teachers how to teach computer science as well. So how many teachers have been impacted by your organization, and how many students have been impacted?
Sure. The biggest thing we've done in terms of reach has been the Hour of Code. And this has been amazing because the Hour of Code isn't just about the work of code.org. It's like Earth Day for computer science. And yesterday was Earth Day, the 50-year anniversary. And it's so humbling to have created something that has become a global movement that is done in schools and even outside of schools. We're about 10 days away from celebrating the 1 billionth hour of code being done. So for something that only started 7 years ago, to have 1 billion hours of code done is pretty awesome. That's not only on the code.org system, it's on all sorts of people's learning platforms. On the code.org platform, we're at 50 million students and almost 1.5 million teachers. So, and the biggest group of those are in the United States. So almost half of all US students are on code.org now, and roughly a third of all US teachers have an account on code.org, which is truly amazing for something that didn't even exist 7 years ago.
Well, it just shows the potential of when you have a vision and a strategy to act on that vision. In the world we're in today, you can change the world. You can literally, your ability to make a difference is so much exponentially bigger if you have the right idea.
Yeah.
So
the same technology that enabled code.org to grow so fast is what we should teach the future generation to learn how to harness for their own ideas as well.
You were a successful entrepreneur. You worked at Microsoft. You were a serious investor in the venture capital world and had success there. What was the biggest challenge of getting a startup off and running? What did you look for?
It's funny because if you ask almost anybody in technology what is the hardest problem when you start a startup, and basically bring all their answers together and see what's the most common theme amongst all of them, it is finding star tech talent. Finding amazing people who are really good at technology is something that the Googles and Microsofts and Amazons of the world struggle with. And because of those very big companies that are paying amazing wages, new startups struggle especially, because how do you compete when the big companies are paying amazing wages for the best people? So that doesn't mean it's the only problem. Access to capital anytime you want to start something is difficult.
One of the things that I'm asking all of our participants in this conversation with students is the concept of failure. And I'm going to ask a stupid question. Have you ever experienced failure? And if you have, I hope you have. What advice would you give students about coping with failure? Because you brought up the issue of resiliency. I think learning how to fail is one of those skills that is so essential to be resilient and to get back up and to be better.
Yes, I've definitely experienced failure. There's many times. It's funny. One point that is memorable to me was when I was working at Microsoft, I was a finalist. It was between me and one other guy for who would have been the special technical advisor to Bill Gates, who at the time was the CEO of the company. And I was, I think, 24, 25. So there was an amazing opportunity. And it would have been life-changing for my career. And basically, I made it to the final interview, and it was me and one other guy, and Bill didn't choose me. And I was devastated because it was so close to something I'd been aiming for. But then what happened right afterwards was I was put in charge of a really important team that was building Microsoft's web browser. And as a 25-year-old, that too was an incredible opportunity, and it wouldn't have been mine had I gotten the thing that I was bummed about. But what I would say about failure also is it's really important to lean into failure. The best achievements come from people who have also failed and then gotten up and tried again. Whether that's among entrepreneurs, Walt Disney got fired before he started the Disney Corporation, or whether it's among politicians. If you look at the story of Abraham Lincoln and how many elections he lost before he finally won. The other thing I'd say is computer science is a great way to teach resilience and grit to students, because unlike other subjects such as math or physics, you don't, when you do math or physics, you have to get the answer right, and there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and kind of nothing in between. Whereas with computer science, you start creating your code and then you run it, and it's like, kind of works, but not quite what you wanted, and you can improve on it. And then you introduce a bug, and then you have to find the bug, and it's like building. And so you learn from the computer that you can, if you put enough work in and spend enough time, you'll eventually get it right. And the computer isn't judging you or telling you you're not fast enough or not smart enough or not elegant enough or whatever. It just does what you tell it to do, and you learn that if you spend the time, you can get it right. And it actually builds those kinds of skills in a very safe environment with the machine. And I think it's a great way of teaching that to students as well.
Awesome answer. Listen, we have a little bit more time. I wanted to get to your views about teaching and about teachers, particularly in a time of crisis. What should they be paying attention to? And if you learn anything through all of the interactions you have with teachers during the quarantine time that might be useful advice in the post-corona world, because we will have a post-corona world, that you could share with them so that they can be more resilient and follow their passions as teachers?
First, I would say, I know this is a very tough time for everybody. It's especially tough for teachers, because with schools closed, just not having the closeness of the children you're used to spending every day with, for teachers feel the most lonely in this time, because they're used to spending their whole day, with 20 or 30 beautiful kids that are their classroom, and now you're apart from all of that. Plus, the method of teaching is different, and for a whole lot of students that don't have connectivity, you're worried about them falling behind and how to keep them going. It is, I don't mean to at all suggest that this is, I just empathize with how hard of a problem teachers are facing, and I believe teachers are doing among the most important jobs in our country, and especially so now. I would say, first of all, getting creative is important, and thinking outside of the box. Teachers aren't just here to teach math. At this time, teaching kids how to be productive, how to be motivated, how to not get depressed, how to not be on an Xbox or watching television all day. These are also things we can teach right now, because at this point, if you have the attention of a child, you're helping their parent with childcare beyond the regular confines of your classroom. The other thing I'd say is, this is a magical time to learn a lot of educational technology tools. People have for years talked about how technology can improve education, not just teaching computer science, but teaching anything using computer technology. And most teachers, they know in their head that that's possible, but they're also like, I got my classroom, I know how to do this, I don't need to change it. Well, this quarantine is forcing us to learn how to change it. And I would say, let's lean into that and learn all the tech tools that you haven't had the time to learn for the past few years. Now's a great time to learn those, and then figure out which ones of those to bring into the classroom once school opens again.
Thank you so much. So you still read Shakespeare instead of doing all the crazy American stuff, huh? I'm joking.
Funny, my kids and I actually just watched Leonardo DiCaprio's Romeo and Juliet. It was my first time introducing them to Shakespeare. They're very young, and I still think it's wonderful if you see it in the right context. Literature never gets old.
Exactly. What are you reading right now?
Right now, it's funny. I asked that question of Bill Gates yesterday, and I have the same answer as him. I'm not reading a lot of books. I'm reading about the pandemic, and I'm reading the science. I think all of us have become armchair scientists in the last few weeks. So keeping up with what's going on and the data is kind of full time for me right now.
Well, on behalf of 330 million people, I'm delighted that you and Bill Gates are thinking hard about that, and maybe we can accelerate a vaccine and get back to interacting with one another.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Take care.